Stolen generations are Aboriginal and Noongar children who, over the course of 1.5 centuries, were forcibly removed from their families and taken to live in missions and institutions. This occurred because of government policies. The first recorded removal dating back to 1833. A large majority of the children that were taken were of lighter skin tone. During this presentation, I will discuss the following points: how the stolen generation has affected the lives of non-Indigenous Australians, why it is important for teachers to understand the facts about the stolen generations, and how learning about the stolen generations and other Indigenous cultural examples will make an impact on our teaching strategies. The government policies that removed the children of the stolen generations left a legacy of loss and trauma that continues to this very day to affect the lives of Indigenous individuals and their families. The children that were taken were taught to reject their own core belief systems and forced to adopt white culture. Many of the children were given different names and not allowed to speak in their native language. Let's look closer at the rippling effect that this occurrence has caused to Indigenous people today. By making Indigenous children reject their culture, it has caused many to be ashamed of it. Many of the stolen generations were made to believe that their parents were dead or that they were unwanted, and therefore caused them to have no sense of belonging or knowledge of their heritage and family. A large majority of the children were offered little or no education and forced to work as servants and manual labourers, which gave them little opportunities throughout their lives. This is reported to be a high incidence of PTSD, anxiety, depression, and suicide amongst people from the stolen generations. A lot of parents of the children ended their lives as a result of the separation from their kids, and many others turned to alcohol to deal with their grief, which created a culture of drinking amongst some Indigenous people and families even to this day. Many children were not given the opportunities to experience growing up in a healthy family and therefore never adopted parenting skills, which has resulted in a generation of Indigenous children raised in state care instead of with their families. It is important to note, by looking at the stolen generations from an analytical standpoint, that the missionaries that helped with the removal of the children actually believed at the time they were helping to save the children to give them a better life. Mosley stated in 2012, there is still a prevailing attitude in the broader community that what was done at the best intentions and in the best interests of the child. In fact, the government policies that allowed these children to be taken was part of the policy of assimilation. Assimilation was based on the assumption of black inferiority and white superiority, which proposed that Indigenous people should not be allowed to die out through a process of natural elimination, or where possible should be assimilated into white community. The laws and the policies are further evidence of the structural racism that has inhibited the lives of Indigenous people and still continues to affect the descendants of the stolen generation who still carry the effects of the trauma that was caused. As a teacher, it is important to deepen your understanding of the facts and the impact that the stolen generation has had on Indigenous Australians. Teachers play a crucial role in educating their students in order to bring the community and all Australians closer together. By having an understanding of such historical events as the stolen generation, it will help to educate the future generations. By learning about such events as the stolen generations, it will empower teachers and give them the confidence to open up discussions within the classrooms about it. It will also give teachers the confidence to support and encourage reconciliation within the school community. Teachers and schools have a responsibility to prevent racism and develop positive attitudes about people from different cultures. In order to do this, you yourself have to understand other cultures, and it will allow you to teach your students to respect other cultures without prejudice. Teachers need to be culturally competent to effectively teach Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders about their history and culture, and although improvements have been made in recent years, schools are still failing Indigenous students. It is common that non-Indigenous educators dismiss the importance of teaching Indigenous history and culture in what Dr. Mark Ross describes as a silent apartheid, which is a knowledge or intellectual segregation that targets the colonization of the mind. There are too many people that are not aware of the uniqueness of Aboriginal culture. So what is a relevant and contemporary Indigenous education pedagogy that will give your students the best opportunity to learn about such events as the Stolen Generation and improve their overall learning experience? Using a modern constructivist-based approach to teaching students about Indigenous history and culture will encourage students to be at the centre of their own learning, discovering different concepts by utilising relevant tactile and contextual teaching aids. Using this approach within the classroom will help gain the students' interest, and students will be engaged in activities, working in groups, having discussions and problem-solving tasks to come to their own conclusions. As a teacher, you will be there to guide them, ask them questions, but not dictate their learning. In a report written by Lingard 2003, students were observed being taught about the stolen generations using a constructivist pedagogy. During this lesson, the teacher was unsure about the outcomes, but it allowed for the students to become producers of their own knowledge, and through activities organised by the teacher, it allowed them the opportunity to engage in higher levels of thinking, which is when students manipulate information and ideas in a way that transforms their meaning. Thus, by allowing students to solve problems and discover meanings and understand things in their own way. By using a constructivist inquiry approach, it will lead to students having a deeper critical thinking and understanding about what the stolen generations have endured, which will lead to empathy for us all to come together as a nation to help the reconciliation process. Planning for their lessons, where possible, it's important to liaise with Indigenous staff or community members, as well as researching on the internet or in books to allow for the best possible knowledge and perspective of the area you will be teaching. If Indigenous cultures are only celebrated on NIDOC Day, Mabo, and National Reconciliation Week, this does not give students an in-depth education of Indigenous history and culture. Dermot Sparks speaks about a tourist curriculum which teaches children in different cultures by emphasising token days like NARDOC Day. This approach is not effective, and by emphasising these days, it does not help deal with real-life experiences or problems. The focus on holidays may seem fun for students, but it gives a false impression to students that that is all Indigenous people do and does not communicate the real culture and in-depth understanding. Therefore, it is important to incorporate an anti-bias curriculum, which will provide students with a more inclusive education. When planning integrated Indigenous learning using inquiry-based learning will help to avoid tokenistic learning that only focuses on well-known days of celebration of Indigenous people. Patterson 1992 stated that the willingness to understand a culture must not be done in such a way that is tokenism, as it may be damaging and degrading. Providing a pedagogy in the classroom that is built around pity or guilt is not as productive as providing recognition of Indigenous culture being living and dynamic. It needs to emphasise that Indigenous culture holds an important rightful place in Australia's future. 2011 stated that the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children need to see their culture reflected in their schooling, otherwise their schooling will be irrelevant for them. Indigenous students can no longer be expected to participate in an education system that fails them and does not include their culture and heritage adequately. In summary of this presentation, I would like to go over the main points. It is integral in your teaching career to learn about such events as the stolen generations in our history, to broaden and deepen your learning by reading, watching videos, liaising with Indigenous people in the community, and by doing so it will help you to educate future Australians, both white and Indigenous, to work towards a better reconciliation of us as a nation. Teaching of Indigenous history and culture needs to be incorporated in lesson plans on a regular basis, and not just as a tokenism approach on days such as NIDOC Day. Using an inquiry and anti-bias approach to teaching will help students to deepen their understanding about the stolen generations. In conclusion, it is evident through my findings the dramatic impact that has occurred on the lives of Indigenous people from the policies of the government. And as a teacher, we have the unique opportunity to help aid the reconciliation process.